This is the OFM Business Hour. Olebogeng Mootse here. Now, the current crisis at Eskom has a number of governance lessons for South Africa, one of which is the vital importance of proper succession planning for key senior positions across corporate SA, says Parmi Natesan, CEO of the Institute of Directors in the country. Here's my chat with her. Well, you say in your piece that the situation at Eskom is calling for proper succession planning for key senior positions. Before we delve into that particular topic, what constitutes succession planning, certainly at that level, at that executive level?
All right, so King 4, which is our code on governance in South Africa, talks about succession planning being necessary at the board level and at executive level. And that means boards really need to be applying their minds to the succession of non-executive directors and executive directors. So what happens if someone playing a key role on one of these governance structures is no longer around? What are the plans in place we have? And there's two parts to it. There's emergency succession. So what happens if tomorrow an executive director is, hit by a bus, so to speak, and who's going to immediately be able to step in and make sure that business continues to run? And then the longer term is, when your CEO starts, the board needs to be thinking in 3 years down the line when the CEO potentially resigns or their contract ends, etc., who is likely to be able to step into their shoes. So it may be someone internally, in which case you can already start putting developmental plans in place to ensure that they're ready in a few years' time to take over. Or it may be someone externally that the board considers they would go and headhunt into this position. But the time to start thinking of succession of your executive team is not when your CEO resigns and your COO is retiring. It needs to happen much earlier.
The question then remains, why is this not happening at our country's state-owned entities? What is the gap then there from your observation?
Look, it's difficult to tell. It seems to us like it's not happening because when a CEO or high-profile executive in a SOE resigns, generally the statement from a board would be then we're now going out to look for a replacement. So it seems to us in the public as if succession planning has not taken place earlier. I think possibly the way in which appointments are made in SOEs also plays a role. So normally in a governance structure, you have shareholders who appoint a board of directors. And that board of directors is then responsible to appoint a CEO. And that's very important in terms of the governance structure and also the accountability, the lines of accountability between the CEO, the board, and the shareholder. But what happens in the SOEs more often than not is the shareholder appoints the board of directors, which is correct. But then the shareholder also wants to appoint the executive or the CEO and almost bypasses the board to some extent. So it's not necessarily always a board-run process, which I think adds to the complication because oftentimes the board sitting there doesn't necessarily know, who the shareholder has in mind to fill these positions. And often it's politically motivated vacancies being filled. I think the bottom line is whenever we're making appointments, whether it be to the board or the executive team, we need a couple of things. So one is we need absolute competence. We can't compromise on that. So we need people who have the knowledge, skill, and experience to be able to serve in that position and serve well in that position. And then we need, obviously, the moral compass to be able to do the right thing. And those are the key things that we're looking for. So yes, we shouldn't be appointing inexperienced people for any reason, whether it be transformation, whether it be just for growth of individuals in the organization, etc. What we should be doing is putting in place developmental plans to get those people ready to serve in those positions.
Well, your closing remarks on this particular topic, what can businesses in the private sector glean from the situation at Eskom in closing?
I think businesses, whether private or public sector, and specifically boards, need to really think about succession planning. What would happen if the CEO wasn't there tomorrow, and what would happen if the CEO wasn't there in a year's time? I think more time needs to be spent on this. It needs to be an agenda item, if not on a nominations committee, then on the board itself. Because I really think that the CEO has a critical impact on the performance of an organization. And therefore, I don't think it's something we can just ignore. And oftentimes succession is a difficult conversation because you're talking about a human being and something potentially happening to that human being or that human being no longer being around for whatever reason. But I think we just have to face it and discuss this openly and have plans in place.
That was Parmi Natesan, CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa. She was weighing in on the importance of having proper succession planning for senior key positions in place. She emphasized that this planning takes place in two parts: short-term succession planning in case your CEO or your head of an institution or a business falls ill at the last moment, and then a more long-term game in terms of looking at after 3 years, after 10 years, who is going to be at the helm in your particular organization. That sit down will be available under the business section on ofm.co.za.